Brexit's impact on UK trade has long been a contentious topic, with projections ranging from economic Armageddon to visions of newfound global posterity. Of course, I tend towards the former rather than the latter, but the recent London School of Economics report presents a more tempered view, and while Brexit has undoubtedly decreased trade, the decline is less severe than was predicted or was feared. Yet, when we look into sectors like farming, fishing, hospitality, education, entertainment, the reality is more nuanced and less attractive. So, what do the numbers tell us, and what does this mean for the UK's economic future? Between 2020 and 2022, UK goods exports fell by 6.4% and imports by 3.1% compared to a non-Brexit scenario. This equates to a £27 billion loss in exports and a £20 billion loss in imports in 2022. However, these figures are smaller than many pre-Brexit forecasts. And large companies have adjusted well to new trade barriers. By contrast, 16,400 small businesses stopped exporting to the EU after 2021, highlighting significant challenges for small businesses. So Brexit hasn't done them any favours. Goods and services that trade with the EU have broadly tracked that with non-EU countries, suggesting some resilience in headline figures. And despite tariff-free trade under EU-UK trade and cooperation agreements, increased non-tariff barriers have hindered exports, particularly for smaller firms. The long-term impacts remain uncertain, as future EU regulatory changes could further complicate trade. So in other words, it's good for the big businesses, it's bad for the small businesses, and big businesses mean big headlines. So yes, let's crow and say it's not as bad as we feared, unless you're a small business, or unless you're a farmer or a fisherman, or a fisherwoman, a fishing family. For farmers, promises of agricultural independence have faltered. UK exports of food and drink to the EU dropped by 19%, and rising bureaucracy have left smaller producers struggling to compete. That's the family farms that Rachel Reeves is now going to attack again. Meanwhile, imports of cheaper non-EU food goods, such as grains and meats, have surged, undercutting UK farmers, undercutting family farms. An example, sheep farmers in Wales face reduced access to their traditional French markets because of sanitary and phytosanitary checks, the SPS checks. The fishing industry, a Brexit rallying cry, has faced logistical nightmares. Shellfish exporters, for instance, have seen delays turn premium products into losses. There was a time when somebody tried to convince me to do animation, to do an animated advert for Brexit, for leave means leave, simply because they told me stories about how the fishing industry was going to get better. I was persuaded to do the advert. I wasn't persuaded to vote for Brexit. And in the end, I didn't take any money for the advert. It was a good piece of work. But I was deceived, and so were they. Quota renegotiations have provided modest benefits, but the industry's overall economic contribution remains negligible. When it comes to entertainment and hospitality, musicians and performers face visa issues, prohibitive costs, transport barriers, leading to a significant drop in EU tours, and British festivals and cultural exchanges have lost EU participants, harming long-term relationships. A decline in EU migrant workers has exacerbated labour shortages, with businesses struggling to find skilled chefs, waiting staff and cleaners for hospitality. The National Farmers Union notes similar issues with seasonal agricultural workers leaving crops rotting in the fields, but that process started during the EU period, under George Eustace particularly. So the farmers have had slap after slap, first by the EU, then by Brexit, and now by Rachel Reeves. When it comes to health, the NHS has suffered from reduced access to EU-trained healthcare professionals. Rising costs of medical supplies because of customs delays have further strained our resources, and the UK is yet to capitalise on any potential advantages, such as developing pharmaceutical hubs to replace EU-based production. When it comes to education, the loss of Erasmus has curtailed opportunities for UK students, with replacement programmes offering fewer exchange opportunities. Universities have seen declines in EU student numbers and research funding, jeopardising their global competitiveness. And it's the research funding which is the key. It doesn't matter how many people you cram into the universities at undergraduate level, a university is judged by its research. Cambridge University's €100 million shortfall in Horizon Europe funding is significant and a really good example of this problem. Catherine McBride offers a contrarian view, suggesting that Brexit might yield benefits if the UK reduces domestic regulatory burdens and refocuses on global trade. She highlights digital customs platforms as tools to reduce SME compliance costs and expand non-EU trade. However, her optimism overlooks the immediate hardships faced by businesses, particularly small businesses, and sectors reliant on EU markets. The Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, estimates a 4% long-term GDP reduction, accounting for not just trade but also productivity and investment losses. So even if you start signalling up and saying, waving your hands and saying, oh yes, trade has not been so adversely affected, productivity and investment has. The LSE's Thomas Sampson today warns small exporters, many of whom have ceased EU trade altogether, are tomorrow's big exporters, underscoring risks to future growth. And the UK has missed out on the post-COVID intra-EU trade boom, particularly in sectors like food, chemicals and small-scale manufacturing. Service exports have grown, but financial services and transport, key industries, lag behind global peers. So while the LSE report offers some relief by dispelling the most apocalyptic forecasts, the challenges facing small businesses, farming and hospitality show the uneven burden of Brexit. Large firms may thrive in adapting to new trade barriers, but small exporters and vulnerable sectors have borne the brunt of the costs. Policymakers must prioritise pragmatic solutions, reducing regulatory burdens, supporting small businesses, addressing labour shortages in critical sectors. Brexit is not the catastrophe that some have predicted, but nor is it the libertarian offer that some have promised. It is instead a complex trade-off, the long-term impacts of which remain unclear. And whether the UK seizes its new opportunities or remains emired in domestic challenges and self-indulgent discussions depends entirely on the choices we make now. Brexit itself was not the problem. The way Brexit was agreed was certainly not an advantage, and Brexit as we move forward is not necessarily a picture of complete gloom and doom, but it certainly hasn't been a happy experience for anybody. It certainly has not been an easy thing to adjust to, and it doesn't look as if it's going to be promising dangling presents in the sky. So we need to balance optimism with realism, and try to reach for some sort of cohesive review at this moment as we approach Christmas, to consider Brexit's economic, emotional effect. And my own conclusion is it's been an appalling experience, but not as bad as it might have been. And there is some hope if we can steer through the system as it currently appears, rather than trying to rather than wringing our hands and talking about what might have been, or trying to play games with the rhetoric. We need to deal with the reality as we face it.